Okay. Okay, we are back at the Cracks in Postmodernity. Today we have Hollis Robbins, who's former dean and now professor of English at the University of Utah. Hollis, I've been very much looking forward to having you on, so thank you for coming.
Thank you for this conversation. I don't forget exactly when we first met, but we've always sort of jumped right into the deep end of the pool.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think we, you published for Compact several months ago about covering the direction that universities are going in, which is something that I've been very much interested in as well. I've been writing about. We met at the Metanoia conference in person. Luke Burgess's with Clooney Institute. But yeah, we've been going back and forth, sharing articles, sharing ideas, and I thought let's just have a discussion and share it with Cracks and Pomo people. So let's
Awesome.
just start. Tell us your story. Give people a little bit of your background so they have a sense of who you
Oh
are.
goodness. It's a narrative arc that doesn't bend toward justice, I don't think, or at least not yet. I grew up in very rural New Hampshire. I have this piece coming out from that, no, from Luke Burgess's earlier conference, the
Mhm.
Novitate conference, where I had organized a panel on on the Black response or the Black engagement with Rene Girard. And in the course of that, talked about, growing up in very rural New Hampshire as a libertarian, reading a lot of Ayn Rand, which I understand shocks you a
Hmm.
little bit, that in fact, I'm still a huge Randite. I'm a still kind of libertarian uh, believer in individuality and autonomy, self-sovereignty, and ended up at Johns Hopkins young on a kind of math scholarship. And I'm just going to skip right over that part of it. But one of the first classes I took with the great Richard Maxey, there's Rene Girard into this class, talking about mimetic theory, talking about Gilgamesh, and he was kind of polar, if you think about it as kind of a polar opposite thinker to Ayn Rand, radical individualism, mimetic theory. Here I am, 16 years old. I'm like, oh my God, I like my worldview just sort of exploded. And I dealt with it by sort of ignoring both of them for many, many years. Um, Now, years later, I did many things. Worked in politics, got a degree in from the Kennedy School of Government here at Harvard. I'm in my Harvard office where I run the Black Periodical Literature project while being a professor at Utah, and noticing that like the two big figures in philosophical figures in Silicon Valley are Ayn Rand and Rene Girard, right? These are two figures that Peter Thiel thinks are, and others think are like the great thinkers. So I've been doing a lot of trying to re-excavate how these figures got there and how they have influenced me over the years.
So we are gonna get back to Rand and Girard in a moment, but first I do want to talk about that initial article that through which I met you, because you touched on, I mean, you really covered a lot of ground and touched on a lot of things that have been on my radar, especially as, I am an adjunct, so I kind of see that end of things. But I spent time in secondary ed, so I was teaching seniors in high school, so I saw a lot of that process of how high school kids get pumped into colleges and the impact that it has on them. And then, teaching them on the other end and as a adjunct professor, I mean, I am getting increasingly concerned about the bureaucratic nature of college
Yes.
education to the point that, it seems like we've lost any sense of like an orienting telos. Like there's no sense of a
Yep.
purpose. We do it because that's what you do. You need a credential to get a job so you can make money and then you die. So what's the point? There's no point, And this is why I think. I see so many students who just have no sense of what they're doing there. Other like they're the driven ones who like I want to have a career, I want to make money, and they're the ones
Right.
who are like, oh, I was told I have to do this, so I guess I'll be here. So
Well,
tell us about these observations you've been making
yeah,
about higher ed.
I think, but I am going to go back to Rand and Girard for
Okay.
this reason. So, like
Yes.
when I again was at Johns Hopkins for my undergraduate, Johns Hopkins is the first American research university. They
Hmm.
don't really care about undergraduates, right? The whole point was to get there to immediate. There's been fights over the years whether Johns Hopkins should either even have undergraduates, right? Because the idea was cutting edge research technology. How can this new kind of university move the edge of engineering, of science, of medicine, right? But also of philosophy, of literary criticism. Like, how do we own the edges? How do we move the ball down the field, right? It's very much of a 19th century project of higher education as the place where you go to learn, to sit at the elbow of experts, right? So, my first higher education experience is in a place where this was the ethos. And coming from Rand, as a Randite, the idea, like her characters in her novels, are really, really good at what they do. Her heroes,
Hmm.
even her villains, right? The idea that, Hank Rearden, or to use one from Atlas Shrugged, like knows his metallurgy, right?
Hmm.
You can tell he has learned and at the elbow of experts and then moved the ball down the field. The other kind of education, which has, you can imagine from places like Harvard, but the liberal arts idea is that this is personal growth, right? You
Yeah.
come and you like see what great people do. I mean, not great people, like kind people do. You learn the best of what the world is, and it's a kind of Girardian uh, education. You model yourself,
Hmm.
right? And this kind of education is concerned with you, all of you, right? Your soul, your
Hmm.
morals, all the things. And this kind of education really emphasizes general education. You should learn a little bit of this, learn a little bit of this.
Hmm.
Um, and I've been part of it in so many of my institutions, but when you start operationalizing um, this outcome that everybody be socially competent and everybody go through in the same way through a 4-year degree, taking these classes, it becomes a factory.
Yeah.
And so it is not the individualized um, uh, transmission of knowledge at the frontiers that can become mechanized at scale. It is this other version of we need to make great citizens. And you hear this all the time. We need to make more citizens. And this is why let us have civic discourse centers and civic institutions
Hmm.
at scale, right? Is very Girardian, right? And so but to carry that off, you need to measure. You need to make sure that, you're going to cancel all classes that are fewer than 15 people, which means you don't have specializations, you have scale. And I don't think this is working. And what I think I have seen, and in that piece, How Business Metrics Broke the University, that really wonderful faculty members who are experts in their field, who are not allowed to teach in their field, have responded in a very human way by either becoming radicalized or
Yeah.
quitting.
Yeah, and you kind of highlight I guess, the cognitive dissonance of this kind of progressive activist mentality and then like the corporate, centralized bureaucratic one that really fuels it. So on the surface, it postures as very progressive and we want to challenge the system. But again, like it's this veneer for a very corporate kind of structure, which is anything
Well,
but
it's
progressive.
corporate on the right as much as the
Yeah.
left. Yesterday, I did this Zoom with Heterodox Academy. It's, great place with this fellow that had come up with this new app called Sway, and Heterodox is trying to have everybody use Sway. at scale, right? He kept saying at scale. The idea is, and he said this, like intelligence is is the best thing in the world. And if we could just have everybody speaking intelligently, the world would be great. Well, no, I'd rather actually individuals working in the field that they want to do, whether they can argue well or not, should not be should not be the goal of higher education, is whether or not somebody can sit and marshal evidence in their field, right? And it was interesting. I had been looking yesterday at this wonderful piece by W.E.B. Du Bois on the criteria of Negro art from 1927. And he said, when God makes a sculptor, he doesn't always make a pushy kind of person that can open doors, right? And I think it's like such a smart idea because he was talking about, theorizing or inventing a sort of a black woman sculptor who couldn't get into art school because of her race. And the response is, well, she should push her way in, which even Ayn Rand might say,
Yeah,
right? But that's,
probably.
when God makes a sculptor, he doesn't always make a pushing kind of person. And
Mhm.
we in higher education need to hear people where they are.
Yeah.
And if that's somebody's expertise, then let's figure out a system that platforms that without requiring that they be a certain kind of person.
Yeah, and I mean, but the other thing that you're saying is that there's so much emphasis on these, I don't know, and everything that's happening outside the classroom to the point that
Yes,
having like what happens in the classroom is just like, oh, that's a formality. That's, sure, we have that, but we invest in the middle management and all these other, programs for students. And it's like,
yeah.
what are we here to do again? I mean, the
Well,
fact.
exactly.
But and
Yeah.
then the impact for classroom professors, I mean, you just see that again, like a lot of students treat it as if it's just going through the motions. And it's just, I don't know, like the sacredness of the act of teaching has kind of been just totally sucked out. And I see it in like the students who I don't know, like who really does not want to be there. There's some students who just really don't want to be in college.
And they shouldn't have to be, right?
When it forces the educator to become a miracle worker of sorts, like you have to go above
Right,
and beyond. And it's like, I'm here to teach. I'm not here to be a social worker, to be a therapist. And
right,
and this is what makes me question ultimately this narrative of, that everybody should go to college. Like this is the
right.
default, which to me, I mean, I think this is ridiculous because not everyone should be in college. It's
Well, and there's a way that we see sort of high culture and certain kind of liberal arts education that is really unkind and unfair to working class people.
yeah.
So let's say I've written in the past about the English major to plumber pipeline, right? Being a plumber, maybe owning your own plumbing shop
Mhm.
will pay a lot better than being an English major someplace, right? But our um, metrics driven higher education system will punish a university for students that graduate and decide to like go into their parents' plumbing business,
Mhm.
right? Because everything's metrics. So if you're an English major, you need to graduate and do these things, and that therefore, with this thing called there's some metrics that state legislatures want to see to say how much money does an English major make, right? So if you go to a plumber, it's actually not on their spreadsheet that
Mhm.
is a possible um, outcome. So you could go get your English degree, be interested in Shakespeare, be interested in theater, be interested in a certain kind of culture, and want to make your life as a plumber. But those metrics will be invisible to the current system. So they don't want you to do that. And I think about, we were talking before we got on this conversation about backgrounds. Your background is part of the Italian community, right? You to love opera, right? To love
Exactly.
a kind of
Yes.
art, you don't have to be. a master's in English or a master's in
Yep.
music theater, right? To be, my grandfather, who had an eighth grade education, just loved great literature and went to, had Book of the Month Club and Toastmasters, right? There was no this idea that your education has to come in certain ways and then your job has to be a certain thing. Um, these are the casualties of the mechanized university.
Yeah, no, and I mean, the possibility of like going to a trade school or an apprenticeship program. I mean, my concern is that first, like it's stigmatized because again, when college becomes the default, like this is the sign that you've accomplished something. Um, you know, there's, as you're saying, like you can have a totally dignified and lucrative life doing a
Right.
trade. I mean, why are we not like, because I saw it, especially teaching in an inner city school, like we
Mhm.
really pushed them not to, like we pushed all of them to go to college. And the ones who went to trade schools were like, oh, well, we're not going to publicize that. We're going to publicize the 99% college acceptance rate.
Yep.
And I'm like, but a lot of my former students, when they, after they, started college, a lot of them dropped out after a year or two. And then they
Mhm.
feel ashamed. So like, oh, I'm a loser. I dropped out. And I'm like, why, why do we tell you to go to college in the first place when you could
Right.
have been making money by now? But then there's, again, there's the corporate dimension of this. They're like, universities are interested in pumping more and more students in because it's more
Right.
tuition being paid, more income, you
Right.
know.
And I
And
think,
yeah,
again, I don't mean to keep pushing Rand, except that that's one of the things that provoked this conversation is she's really good at working people that are, if they are, the idea would be that you're really good at what you do. If you're a lineman on
yeah,
a railroad, if you're,
mm,
a secretary in an office, she cares about being good at what you do, and
yeah,
that is the highest ethical virtue, not, you know how much money you make or where you went to college, right? And then you can, I think about jobs these days or the kinds of things one does being a kind of ad executive, or some sort of financial wizard in this or that. Like, what does that mean to be really good at what you do unless you're really good at manipulating people's views or finding that tiny sliver of money you can make between what you're buying and what you're selling. Like, if that's what you want to be really good at, great, but we don't even talk about careers in that way. We don't talk about expertise in that way. Again, because we want markers of other ways to value people and not individualize. Like, is this person really good at what they do? And like, I'm sorry, but a great plumber, right,
yeah,
is is, as far as I'm concerned, a kind of career that all of us in higher ed, and I mean HVAC, elevator repairman,
yeah.
whatever, right?
Hmm.
Those people really matter to our future flourishing.
So now I mean, you've written a good deal about AI, and I mean, I'm kind of an AI doomerist. Like I mean, I hate it. I never use it. I think it's going to destroy the world. And I don't know. I mean, with my students, the thing is, so the class I teach, I mean, it's mostly philosophy and religion.
Mhm.
So the essays I assign are usually very personal, like it's usually reflection kind of stuff. It's not heavy research. So I say to them, look, like, number one, it's not that hard to reflect on what Socrates said or what we're reading in the
Right.
sacred text. But also, like, don't you want to tell me in your own words what you actually think? Like, wouldn't that be more interesting? For me, it's going to be more interesting. And I've gone to the point where I'm like, look, if you need to use chat to like get your ideas gut flowing, fine. But after you write it, you submit it through an AI detector, and then you submit it, and then I'll do the same. So far, so good. I mean, I've gotten very few AI generated stuff. But again, I mean, maybe you can challenge my skepticism. Maybe you can make a case for, the good that it can do within higher ed.
Well, I mean, let's start again with the assumption of why the student is in your class in the first place.
Hmm.
If a student is in your class because the student wants to be in the class and wants to learn from you and respects you as an expert in what you teach, right? Then that is the ideal. That has nothing to do with what technology, because they are there to learn from you.
Yeah.
If they are there because they have to be there for some other reason, that's a whole different relationship between the students and you. And one of the again, the problems with the mechanized universities that I'm seeing is that, the general education requirement, you put tens of thousands of people, and if not into millions of students into classrooms every year with low-paid teachers who are not valued in this expert. I'm sorry, you have to be there and you have to teach them.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, you're going to need a lot of technology and apps to make that a good relationship because it just simply can't be. So, if we want to have millions of people have this layer of expertise that I call general education so they can learn to be good, be mimetically um, better at understanding the world and things, have AI deliver it.
Hmm.
That's
Okay.
my view of it because it isn't the teacher, expert, student wanting to learn relationship, right?
Hmm.
Ideally, and I spend a lot of time talking with the St. John's people, Zena Hitz particularly,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Right. Anybody who goes to St. John's who wants to be in one of those classes, if you're there, you
Yeah.
know, uh, people who really who are good at what they do, don't cheat at what they do. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day. He'll go unnamed. We were talking about essay mills, right? Before, buying or selling papers before
Yeah.
AI. And he said, yeah. And he was kind of confessing. And he said, yeah, I've sold a few papers.
Oh, wow.
And I said, but you didn't buy any. He goes, God, no, I wouldn't buy any. My voice is so important to me, but I've sold some, right? And when you think about that was such an interesting conversation because of those two kinds of cheating. I would never buy, but I'd sell, right? I want to be the person that has my ideas into the world,
Hmm.
right? Not to take somebody's secondhand ideas, the way Ayn Rand would put it, secondhand. Uh, uh, I don't want to put that in my head or don't want to put it out under my name.
But this is where I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm too much of a purist, but I'm like, if you're using someone else's work, like, what are you doing here in the first place? Like, why are you?
I
I
agree.
mean, because again, it's my
I
purism
agree.
coming out, but it's like I know that the reality is a lot of these students are only getting the education because they need a credential. So like they don't really like, why am I here? Because I need a credential. So I don't necessarily need to know all these things and do all the work myself. I get it, but
But
isn't that
let's solve
sad?
that problem. I mean that. Like, let's
Yeah.
solve that problem. Let's solve the problem that everybody who's in your class is in their class because they want to learn from you. Now, I actually don't think it's that hard. It's just coming at education in a different way. And it's telling students, here's your list of classes, here's your list of faculty,
Mhm.
here's the list of things that you would learn. You choose.
Yeah. But
And
it's
once they
also, yeah.
choose, right,
Mhm.
then you are correct. They are undermining themselves by saying, I chose this and now I'm going to cheat at it. But they didn't
Mhm.
choose to be in your class. A whole bunch of other things
Yeah.
chose and pushed them there. And that is unfair to you and it is unfair to them.
But then the other piece of this is like, okay, yeah, very easy to blame the system, but as a professor, I have a responsibility to at least attempt to engage the students and make them see why this is worth their time, even if this is just a core requirement, even if they're never going to use it in their career. Like, if I find it fascinating, I should be able to communicate, and so
Sure.
that like that's what I try to do. And again,
Oh,
like
not good. That's
it's
honorable.
effective to a point. There are always going to be some kids who don't care at all, but No, but I do think it's like, okay, let's not just blame the system. Like each, and this isn't maybe a Randian kind
I
of
agree
take.
with you on
I have
that.
the responsibility to, engage the students and make them care and show them why it matters. It's not, it helps when the institution
Right.
incentivized makes it easier, but I still have my agency. So,
Yeah. No, and I agree with that. I mean, I think that's the honorable thing to do, right? Is from your perspective, you have to do what you have to do because you take your craft
mhm.
seriously. You take your expertise seriously. I admire you doing that. What I'm
Yeah.
saying is for the students who are there,
Mhm.
right? They are not, do they under, I mean, they do. They understand their position really well. They understand the position like, I have to be here. I have not chosen it. So,
Mhm.
how do we put their choice and their agency
Yeah, no.
back into the equation?
But if you're saying that, then do you think that we need to like cut down on core requirements and make,
Yes,
yeah, you do.
100%.
Okay. Okay.
100%. I mean, it's
So,
funny. I said this on another conversation that I had gotten a flat tire a couple months ago, and I went to the local place to get my thing repaired, and there was just I could tell just really smart young woman behind the counter, and I said to her, "Are you a University of Utah student?" And she said, "Yeah, but I'm, taking a break to make some money." And I said, "What do you want to do?" And she said, "I want to be a neuroscientist." And I said, "And where are you in the thing?" And she goes, "I just spent $8,000 just to do a first year of general education that I learned nothing." Right. I thought that I'd be starting college, going right into classes that I wanted to take to be a neuroscientist. Right. And it was just like like you couldn't have asked somebody to say like a more perfect thing to me, right? That here
mhm.
she is, this woman who could be on her way to being a neuroscientist, is working in this tire shop, doing a very nice job, like, putting herself into her craft.
Yeah.
Um, I'd rather have her on her way to being a neuroscientist than having her go $8,000 in debt for classes that she doesn't need because somebody somewhere thought that that would be good for her.
So this is where I'm going to push back a little as
Okay.
someone who's Jesuit educated, because I mean, at Fordham, as like at many other Jesuit schools, like they really have a very extensive core program. And I mean, so the Jesuits use the term cura personalis, so like, the development of the whole person.
Right.
And I think they really believe in it. I don't think it's just,
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
buzzword or whatever. Like when they made me take all these classes that, have nothing to do with my major, I really did get the sense of like they want me to be exposed to the
Hmm.
whole
Hmm.
world.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I don't know, like now I am happy I took these math and science classes, which I never would have taken because at least I understand a little bit about, biology and
Hmm.
what
Hmm.
statistics and whatnot. But I mean, back to your point, I do think like when it's treated as a mere formality and the institution doesn't really
Right.
believe and like express to students why it's important, then yeah, cut it completely.
Well, and you were making my point. You chose to go to a Catholic
Hmm.
university, right? And you
You're right.
chose, right, that this was going to be your path. And when you choose a path, yeah, there's some things you have to do along the path, right?
Yeah.
And so part of what bothers me about state education is it's the state telling you, and you don't have a choice. Now, you
Hmm.
do, I guess, have the choice. You don't have to go to a state education, but this is the one that is
Yeah.
subsidized.
Yeah.
And the state doesn't have an ethics or a morality, right? That the
Well, it
Catholic
does, but it doesn't tell you
well,
anything.
that's what I'm saying. It's the state
Yeah.
saying, we
Yeah.
want to make citizens, right? And we're going to make you pay reduced rate, taxpayer funders rate, but we're going to make you pay for our belief that you should be a citizen. I think that's whacked, right? I think that's a waste of everybody's money. If we've got a citizen that wants to be a neuroscientist,
Hmm.
isn't that the best use of our taxpayer money to help her do that?
Yeah, no, this is where you're convincing me to become maybe a little bit more of a Randite. But okay, before we get to her, the last thing I'll ask about universities. So I wrote about the enrollment cliff, which we've
Yeah,
just hit.
smart. Yep.
So 2007 birth rate declined. Now we have
Yeah.
fewer 18-year-olds, fewer people,
Right.
fewer Americans applying to universities. We see schools trying to get international students who can pay full tuition. We see, this, they're lowering the standards, taking in, people they normally wouldn't have. I mean, what do you see coming? What do you think this enrollment cliff is gonna bring on in the future of higher ed?
It's interesting. I think we're going to see a lot of contraction. I mean, at Harvard, the reduction in PhD students for, I think is less about finance. Maybe. I mean, I don't know personally, but also about contraction in the sector. I spent a lot of the last couple hours in the last few days with Dan Wang, whose great new book, Breakneck, about China, is just out, and he was here lecturing. We got to hang out a bit. And, I met him through spending some time and lecturing in China and seeing, like the first time went in, I think 10 or 11, building just at, like one of those stop motion things you could like look out your window, and then the next day there'd be like a huge university just like there building these massive infrastructure so that they don't have to send their students here, right? Which has been propping up our higher education sector for over a decade. All right. Somebody had said some years ago, um, China has more honors college students than we have college students,
Wow.
right? And so, in fact, we have been getting some of their very best students here. English language competency is certainly some friction, but we have benefited by these extraordinary students coming here and being part of the higher ed ecosystem. So now, with all these, huge universities that have grown up, practically overnight. They don't have to send their students here. So that on top of the enrollment cliff is going to be a disaster. Now, what do we do about that? Well, you know, uh, part of the muddying the waters, there's this great book by Joshua Brown that I'm about to finish my review of, that talks about the ways that so many institutions of higher education have made themselves viable through online asynchronous classes. And we know this, right? Right. You could just, you know, scale up online classes that people want to take. But the ways that he sort of details the ways that the profits from that have gone to building a bricks and mortar infrastructure. And it's always bricks and it's always mortar and they always have ivy on it, right? Because that's what college looks like, right? And so this kind of building up this infrastructure on the backs of online program at this moment of AI, where online education isn't going to mean anything, I think we're going to see multiple collapses happening at the same time. The enrollment cliff, as you have very articulately written about, the collapse of Chinese students, being educated at home, and then third, AI, right? These three things are going to happen at the same time. And woe to any institution is not looking at all three of these.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of, so I cited Musa Al-Gharbi in the Compact article on the enrollment cliff, and he was saying, I mean, if universities start shutting down, perhaps that's not the worst thing because then there are going to be less applicants, less people applying to schools, more people rejected, and then they're going to be incentivized to pursue other career paths earlier on, like I was saying,
Right,
rather than starting, quitting, feeling like a
right,
loser. So
right.
I don't know. I mean, I think it's sad, but again, I don't believe in universal college education. So I think
We're in agreement.
perhaps this is gonna kind of be the catalyst for us to revisit that narrative.
And I
We'll
think that,
see.
the models are going back to other models. I had written on my Substack a few months ago about corporate training programs, right? And there used to
Mhm.
be, Ford University, General Motors University,
Yeah.
General Electric training programs, right? You didn't go to college. You went into the higher education of your field.
Mhm.
And I'm in some conversations with some big companies that are thinking about doing that. I don't want to talk about them specifically. I think it was not Apple, but I know that Apple University was something that, and I haven't followed where it is, but the idea that you would go and you'd work at Apple and you'd also get an education that's within there. And again, I'm not talking about from knowing details, but that is a model that I see a lot more of in the future, right?
Mhm.
That your education, your expertise, back to what I said about what I think the ideal is of higher education, post-secondary education, is getting expertise in your field, learning at the elbows of experts. Now, even if you're a software engineer at Apple, you could want and choose to learn philosophy from a philosopher, right?
Mhm.
And that is a wonderful, wonderful thing, right? And I do see that that model of higher education can do a lot more good. It's a lot more efficient, by which I mean students are choosing to take
Yeah.
classes, choosing to put their work and energy into those classes better than this scale model, which is the most inefficient thing that I have ever seen.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. But let's move on to Rand. So I want to introduce this part of the discussion. I want to read you a quote about Rand by Camille Paglia, another libertarian, who says Rand, like Simone de Beauvoir, is an intellectual of daunting high seriousness, while I think comedy is the sign of a balanced perspective on life. As a culture warrior, I have used humor and satire as the most devastating weapons in my arsenal. So Rand, Sapalia does, she goes on to say in this interview that she has a great respect for her as a fellow libertarian, as a very strong woman. But I mean, Rand does strike me as this kind of dour, self-serious person. And I wonder, I mean, as somebody who's been brought up on her, you don't seem to, your personality seems a lot more lively than Rand. So I'm wondering how that works out.
Well, the thing is, and again, you bring up your Jesuit education, right? And if I understand it correctly, and there were some, I grew up in a very Catholic hometown in New Hampshire, and so that there was some Jesuit retreat house places there, so I'm a little familiar. But correct me if I'm wrong. There's a lot of self-questioning or questioning of the rules, of questioning everything, right? In
Yeah,
order to find God, right? To understand your life should be questioning,
yeah.
right? Am I getting
No,
that?
that's right. That's fair. Yeah.
Right. And see, I don't consider objectivism, which is Ayn Rand's particular brand of living in the world, too dissimilar. Which is to
Hmm.
say, let us question the premises of this. What is the reason for this rule? Is the reason for this particular rule like every college student in America having to take a civics education,
Hmm.
right? What is the reason for that rule? Is that reason for the rule? Does it produce human and individual flourishing, or is it a cage?
Hmm.
Right. And I think, she of course lived long before that, but, growing up in the Soviet Union, understanding state coercion, understanding ways that modern life coerced the individual in multiple and competing ways to the fact that it's like, okay, I'm just going to give in to this coercion and I'm going to buy what the, ads on my internet tell me to buy. Or you could struggle and resist at every moment to say, why is this happening? So, yes, right, her way of living in the world is very, very strong medicine.
Hmm.
Not very many people can do it. And yes, you're exhausted at the end of the day,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean it's not fun and funny.
Hmm.
Right. So
Okay.
that's what I'm going to keep saying. And,
Fair.
and,
Fair.
she didn't want to be a scold. I mean, she was.
Hmm.
Right. So very early on, figured out like the way I'm going to popularize my views is I'm going to write novels. Right. And I'm going to have good people and I'm going to have bad people and I'm going to have them working things out. And maybe they're a little cartoonish. Right. But I will take that over any kind of nudge kind of
Mhm.
public policy that's going to nudge you in a direction and tell you you should be doing this instead of that, or some sort of app that's going to tell me how to have civic discourse. I will take honest engagement with questioning her way
Mhm.
over any other way.
Yeah. So, but your parents raised you on Rand, which is very unusual. I mean, you in this essay you wrote, you're saying you weren't raised with religious traditions, you weren't raised with any of that, but I mean, a very libertarian upbringing, which I mean, I don't know anybody who I know people who lean libertarian, but not as like a way of life. So, I mean, what was that like?
Well, it was grim. I should say now they became born again Presbyterians in
Oh,
1992.
okay.
So I'm Jewish, and I had always sort of felt culturally Jewish, and my father's family is Jewish, and they, were affected by the Holocaust, and a lot of trauma there. My grandmother's family in Latvia was wiped out, um, and I just felt much closer to her. So
Mhm.
I converted just to make it kosher and raised my kids Jewish. Both of them are married to or about to marry Catholics, by the way.
Wow.
But right in the middle of my hold, like I'm actually going to embrace being observant, and which I am very. Um, they became born again Presbyterians, and through a very charismatic pastor in the Presbyterian Church in Londonderry, New Hampshire. And, you know, we, I kind of say, like, you know, how am I supposed to reconcile this?
Yeah.
But there's a way that Calvinism,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
There's a way that Calvinism can share the stage with objectivism, in the way to say that
Okay.
it is hard, hard medicine. Now, Calvinism will say it's up to God, not to you. And objectivism say, well, it's up to you and not God. But both of them say act according to your principles.
Huh, okay. So there's the horseshoe, the overlap. All right.
Now, the number of Thanksgivings we had to take to get there.
Interesting. But
Yeah.
okay, but then this is what's interesting about one of the many things that's interesting about this essay is that um Rand and Girard seem totally opposed, especially on this issue about, can I be a totally self-determined individual who makes my own decisions? Um, and then you have Girard saying that no, like everything's mimetic. We're always imitating someone. And you start out by like kind of identifying the common Nietzschean point of origin in both of them, and then you eventually get into like, okay, where is there some overlap? But map this out for us. Like, what happened when you're growing up on Rand, and then you discover Girard, and which challenges your worldview?
Well, yeah, so Rand really does, suggest to you as a kind of lesson, right?
Hmm.
Figure out who you are. What is it that you want? What is it that drives you? In terms of, for me, like raising kids, like it was quite early, interesting early on that my son was always interested in flight, flying airplanes,
Hmm.
rockets, whatever. He's now an aeronautics engineer, right? People were pushing him into certain things, like you got to go play soccer, you got to do this, and he loves being athletic. But you could just tell, you know when you spend a lot of time looking at a kid, what they're interested in. My
Hmm.
daughter's a lawyer. She was always interested in law. She was always arguing. She was always sort of organizing things. And again, especially being a woman, right? You get pushed into a lot of different ways of wanting to approach the world. It is hard to bring out a person's individuality in this
Hmm.
context, right?
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of listening, and people will always like come out of left field and do things or embrace things that you're not expecting them to do or embrace. So the work of nurturing individuality is the work that she is interested in. Like
Mhm.
how does that work? How and she's not a systematizer, and so this is just, what I grew up thinking about. Like how do you create individuals? And how do you create individuals at scale, right? Which is what a nation has to do. Then you go to Girard, who's interested in how we imitate each other. Now, that's there
Mhm.
in Ayn Rand's universe as the evil to be avoided, right? So, as
Mhm.
at age 16, to be in this class with a person who's articulating something that is, on the other side of the curtain, right? The evil that she says to avoid, and but doing it in a really interesting and smart and thoughtful, charismatic way, kind of broke my head for a
Yeah.
while. But I absorbed it, right? Because he's not wrong. Because
Yeah.
embracing one's own individuality is hard. It's really
Yeah.
hard.
No, and I mean, my issue with like the libertarian point of view is that, yeah, I mean, just on a very basic anthropological level, like we're born into a system of relationships. We come into existence because of a choice that was not ours. We understand the world because of relationships. So like fundamentally, like relationships constitute who we are.
Mhm.
And yeah, this is where I think, okay, we need a healthy dose of that kind of individualism, especially if you're in a society that's, clouded by collectivist ideology. So for her, Soviet era, but I think for us with the kind of like victim, identity politics kind of stuff, like we need a healthy dose of like, okay, lift yourself up by your bootstraps. As long as we understand it's never going to happen in complete isolation. Like, in order to learn how to take responsibility for myself, I need to emulate someone who sets an example of what that looks like. So it's like I need a mentor, but they're not going to do the work for me. And when I
Mhm.
make mistakes, I'm not going to blame the world.
Right.
And I mean, for me, I have to say Christopher Lasch has been very helpful with Culture of
Mhm.
Narcissism because like, he's this kind
Like
of
it.
like left populist who has this strong critique of systems, like has this kind of quasi-socialist point of view, but
Mhm.
also understands the role of individual responsibility. That, like you don't, and I think especially like as a millennial living through like, the entire woke
Right.
era, I see how we've really been educated to, well, like when I'm confronted with the problem, to find a way to play victim. And that's how
Mhm.
you gain social currency by playing the suffering Olympics. Whereas I'm seeing like number one, how psychologically dysfunctional it is.
Yep.
But also, it's just morally problematic because, like, sure, there's always the
Yep.
system is corrupt and it contributes to whatever problems I have. But, like I was saying with being in the classroom, sure, the university should change. I'm here right now. I can go out of my way to do a really good job educating these students. I'm happier when I go out of my way to take
Mhm.
responsibility for what I'm doing. But
Mhm.
also, like, it's just it creates a more functional classroom,
Yep.
So this is where I'm like, okay, Rand is onto something. I'm not gonna like, drink all the Kool-Aid, but I think there's something to be mixed in,
Well, and
but
I think what you're talking about your choices, right? And this is
yeah.
what, her like again, growing up in the Soviet Union, et cetera, like the greatest evil for Rand is taking away somebody's choice, right? Not
Mm,
allowing you to say, I choose this. And I totally agree. You can choose friends, you can choose mentors, you can choose to be a friend, you can choose
mhm,
to be a mentor. But the idea is, can we differentiate between those things that you are choosing, right, from your own volition to do for your
yeah.
reasons, to this idea of like, I'm sorry, you're being pushed in that direction and you're going to do this and you have no choice. And the thing that
Yeah.
makes me so angry about state coercion, right, is what it is doing and how it is contributing, right, to this idea of so many students who could have this opportunity and can say, okay, fine, I don't have a choice, but therefore
Mhm,
I will choose
yeah.
this, or I will choose to pay attention. I will exercise my choice to the extent that I can. Right. That
Yeah.
is where the healthy part is. That's where the education is. Anybody who doesn't choose to be in your class, but once they're there, chooses to pay
Mhm,
attention to you, bless them.
yeah.
Like that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, but let's talk more about this. I mean, woke and millennials and like the
Ay,
effect. Because I mean, you've taught us, you've seen. No, like I have to say, like I really see how dysfunctional like being taught the victim thing and seeing how I don't know, like I've lost a lot of friends after, like you're saying, after I realized, like, okay, at a certain point you have to take responsibility, you have to choose. A lot of my friends are very much stuck on the victim thing and like everything is everyone else's fault. And I'm seeing how it's just like it's just I mean, I don't want to be too much of a doomer, but like it has destroyed a generation psychologically. And I'm like, I don't
yep.
know. I mean, so what do you see? Like what do you see going on?
I think as I said to you, I'm starting this book project called the Conservative Humanities, and it will be a little bit of a manifesto. But the idea of it is to ask the to ask the right not to go down this same path,
Mm,
and to say that real conservatism is embracing the individual. Even Burke is an institutionalist, but if anybody who is educated in a certain way understands that, you don't educate you might give an education, you might allow and proffer an education, but
mhm.
students learn individually,
Yeah.
right? Everybody hears you individually. The individual is what is going to matter for the future of the flourishing of our country. And again, having spent so much time over the last 2 days thinking about China and China's education system and ways that China does some things better than we do and some things not as much. I mean, the big differences in our country are, the platforming or the privileging of individual creativity, individual um, uh, uh, trajectory, right? And the right is doing exactly what the left used to do in playing the victim and
Mhm.
then deciding we're going to take away people's choice and demand that they approach life this way from the position of the right is just as corrupt as anything the left did in wokeness. And so um,
Yeah.
I think the only way to get back uh, to creating a generation, the next gen, what is it called? Generation Alpha,
Yes.
is to find ways and teach choice, exercising
Mhm.
individual choice as the only way. Um, and that means going up against some very, very powerful forces in the United
Mhm.
States that are collecting data on you and trying to move you to in this direction and that. And I find that as horrific and Soviet as Ayn Rand would have found it.
Mhm. But I mean, this makes me think of Girard again because especially with what we see going on the right wing with the kind of anti-woke reactionary stuff. I think this is a perfect example of like I don't know, there's something extremely mimetic about the nature of anti-woke discourse because it's the mirror opposite. Like
Right.
substantially, fundamentally, there's no difference. It's just we're gonna react and do the opposite thing.
Well, the piece that you guys published, that horrible feminization thing, right? It's just like it's the same thing on the other side,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
This
and
group of
it's
people is a
swaying the
bad group of
pendulum.
people, and like what, I don't blame you for publishing it, but my goodness, like my reaction as which provoked this conversation was to say like, oh my God, like why is the right doing this?
Yeah, and but see, and this is where I think Girard is interesting because okay, like he starts from this premise that we're always going to be imitating, we're constantly like copying someone else. The question becomes not, it doesn't become like, how do I stop copying? I think it's when do I begin using my agency to ask, okay, why am I copying this person? Do I have a
Right,
reason? Is there
right,
something genuinely
right.
compelling?
Right,
about. And this is something that at one of the panels at the Metanoia conference this year with Luke came up that like again, if we take it for granted to be true that we are mimetic beings, we're always going to copy, then again, it's like let's become more critical, more curious about who we're copying,
right,
who's actually worth emulating. But it goes back
right,
to what you're saying about Rand, that like at a certain point, our individual agency has to enter in to the picture. Like we have to choose who to
right.
copy, you know.
And I think that there are ways, I've appreciated Rand more for understanding Girard, but I think I understand Girard more for having been raised with Rand, which is, we are adapted evolutionary to imitate, right? And for Rand, that was like the worst part of human nature, right? That is the thing to keep at bay. Well, I mean, again, I'll go back to your upbringing and your, I don't want to use your language, but being born into sin, right?
Yeah.
Like, isn't the entire idea is fighting certain aspects of one's nature, understanding that one's tendency could be toward evil or sins of the flesh or whatever it is. Like, I don't want to get into your
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
your space, um, but that life is a little bit of a battle, right? If you want to fight the battle, and there are so many people who don't want to fight the battle, and that's fine too, right? But if you're going to fight the battle, it is a constant day-to-day battle.
Mhm.
And yes, you could end up being a little bit grim, right? But to keep the forces of mimetic desire at bay, you know, uh, is what Rand advocated.
Yeah. So, all right, just to wrap things up, I'm going to ask you, having spent years in academia and at higher education, I mean, what message do you have for I'm going to say for students. I mean, because we do have like a younger audience. We have people who are in undergrad, we have people who are doing graduate degrees. I mean, what do you want to tell them? What do you think they should be thinking about?
It's what I like most about teaching, is having a classroom of students and finding ways to teach them where they are. And I think I mentioned this to Joel Miller in a conversation that we had. I was teaching a class in modernist drama some years ago at Johns Hopkins, and I had a student who decided to write his final paper from the perspective of his cat. And it was just like, he's sleeping, I'm the cat, I'm going to write this paper. And it was like so smart and so whimsical and so crazy and like didn't follow the prompt. And it's like, I'm a cat. I'm like more modern than you as a student. I mean, as a human could ever be because we don't care about rules. This is the
Wow.
essence of modernism. Brilliant, right? And it's the kind of thing that, like, like, there's just no other way. But and this would happen all the time. I got a reputation of appreciating individuality.
Mhm.
Students, the opportunity for students to be individuals, take them. And if you've got a professor that would fail you for that, or if you're in a situation where you are going to be punished for that, use your voice then,
Hmm.
right? Just understand that your individuality, your creativity, work within, understand that people are experts and learn from experts. But my God, don't let this metrics system box you in so
Hmm.
that you aren't you.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is how much like when you sent me the Rand text last week, I was like, Rand, ugh, I hate her. Which I've even written about. But now I'm like, no, but we pretty much are seeing eye to eye. I think we may come at it from a different framework, but like it's commonsensical. It
Well,
is
I
in the
think
same.
it's because of your Jesuit education
Thank
that you
you.
understand to be raised in the idea of questioning
Yeah.
always, right? The human stance should be questioning, not acceptance. And, the fact that we cancel and the woke movement canceled people who question, and right now the right is trying to cancel people who question,
Yeah.
um, really makes me sad.
But and then what ultimately emerges here is like, is our commitment to truth or to an ideological agenda? Because yeah, and I mean, this is what I see happening on the right, that they become so hell-bent on fighting against the woke thing and owning the libs that it's like, okay, but what happens when you're wrong? What happens when the libs are right about a couple of things? It's like if we're not prioritizing truth in itself, then we're screwing ourselves over.
I'd rather privilege questioning than
Yeah.
privilege truth, right? Because you
Hmm.
don't get to truth without questioning it, and it's not going to be
Yes.
expressed
Yeah.
unless somebody's
Yeah.
like, and there's some really wonderful people like the Cosmos people, like
Hmm.
Brenda McCord, talks about truth, and it's like, yeah, but
Okay.
questioning is the process to get there. So, let's teach people to ask great questions. Like again, back to being a in being faculty, the thing that I liked best about being a faculty member is to emphasize questions, right? When you're a
Yeah.
dean, you can't question. You just have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think ultimately more conversations like this, because again, like we come at things from very different angles, from points of view, but we clearly got somewhere. And I think if we are not open to having these kinds of conversations, if we're not seeking that out, like yeah,
Excellent.
yeah. So, all right. So, Hollis, where can people can follow you on Twitter and on Sub or X and on Substack,
Yeah.
right?
And some anecdotal value is my handle. And my handle both on Twitter or X, anecdotal, and then anecdotal value on Substack. I laugh. I used to laugh that I want to win the Nobel Prize in economics for quantifying anecdotal value, the
Hmm.
ways that we learn best, not with statistics, but stories. And the idea that, a particular kind of story can capture the imagination, and you're like, oh, that's interesting.
Hmm.
And so the value of a good anecdote, beats statistics every single time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. And your book, do we know when it's coming out, or
Well,
is it
right
still
now
in the
I've got two
works?
other books to do. I'm doing a book on Robert Hayden's poetry, and Robert Hayden is just I don't get me started. It's he's like my favorite poet. A book on the African American sonnet tradition, and a couple of other things, and then I'll move to I'm just taking notes on the conservative humanities, announcing it here first.
Awesome. So more to come. We suggest you look out for it. But Hollis, thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's been delightful. You've been delightful from the minute I met you.
Thank you. This was fun. All right.